Hey guys, super happy to be here once again. Today I'm with a great friend of mine, Garrett. Before we're going to be starting, I will just make a short introduction about you, Garrett, and after I would love if you can talk. You know what? Why wouldn't I do it? Talk about yourself. Tell us how you feel today. Let the audience know who you are. Let's go.
Well, hey, Feck, it's thank you for having me on. Very
That's
much
that's my
appreciate it.
privilege.
Um, I'm Garrett. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Epoch. We're a AI native quantitative research startup, building tools for institutional investors to integrate AI into their workflows. Before this, I worked
Which
on
is
the
which
fixed.
is a hell of a statement by itself. Well, most of the world is very conservative, and you and I we share the same aspirations about the evolvement of the quantitative industry. Obviously, we're going to be talking about it later on, but which is for me, look, having an entrepreneur that says, okay, I'm going to integrate AI properly to their research workflows. That's very, very interesting, and that's very eye capturing.
Yeah, yeah, most definitely. And I guess prior to founding Epoch, I worked on the fixed income desk at Bank of Montreal in New York. So joined there in their analyst program out of college, and then pivoted to building the company with a friend from college. So
Mhm. Brilliant. So, let's start from the end or from the beginning. What do you like to?
up to you.
Let's start with the end. So let's start by the end. Okay. So let's talk about Epoch. You offline, we have been we discussed a little bit about what you're doing right now, and you're actually creating. I would start talking, and then you obviously more than able to fix me if I'm wrong. But you're actually creating a system or an engine to create or to initialize trading strategies for institutions and hedge funds, which is creating a strategy that have passed their own due diligence or that have a potential to pass their own due diligence and selling that particular product to them. I think it's a very very clear and concise statement, although it's very very hard. Now, I would like to ask you about how you're actually facilitating the strategy and enabling them to be able to integrate such a strategy into their portfolios in order to make it very diverse. And
Yeah.
that's
So
like the proposition that you're coming with.
Yeah, I would clarify a little bit. So I think when we think about Epoch, we think about more so handing them the toolkit to develop their own strategies. And so when we looked at kind of what AI in trading could look like, there's a lot of different areas that it can cover, across a lot of the different asset classes and how analysts and traders interact with the market. And on the quantitative side, there's a few kind of core issues with LLMs and the way that they're designed that make quant, and I would say to some extent, math and data in general, a challenge. And so our approach was if we build kind of a traditional quantitative infrastructure stack, full backtesting engine in C++, and a lot of all of the core things that go along with it, and then kind of layer AI on top. You avoid a lot of the look back bias that LLMs have because of the way they're trained. You fix the issues with determinism and hallucinations. And so you're able to essentially make it accessible where
How do you fix the issue with? I'm sorry to interrupt you
no, no,
because
no, by all
you
means.
know that's my job here to
Of
interrupt you.
course.
Unfortunately, you have spoken about determinism. When somebody uses that word, it makes my alarm to turn on. How do you fix the determinism problem or the hallucination problem within an LM with the system that you have developed? Because obviously. I had the privilege to interview Paul Belakan, and we were speaking about testing different varieties of trading strategies, and he mentioned over and over and over and over again the importance of the change in the environment because the strategy is very applicable to a certain environment, and the other one might be 180 degrees the opposite. So how do you actually create a dynamic environment in order to capture or to resolve that issue in advance?
Yeah. So essentially what we've done is we've kind of segregated the LLM layer and the actual like computation layer. And so if you were to just have an LLM outright, run a backtest or, write you a Python script that would represent some sort of analysis or strategy, you know, it in itself would one, you'd have to vet in a lot of different ways that it's written correctly, what libraries it's referencing and so, naturally, there's a lot of hallucinations involved in that process, and the LLM itself, has been
Mhm.
trained on, history of data, and so the look back bias is kind of built into that. And so what we've done is essentially segregated that. And so when you essentially type in a query, if you want to run some type of analysis with our system, the LLM is actually not the environment that any of the computation is done in. And so the LLM
Okay.
really functions as only so much as to parse what you've written, and then it's able to communicate that with our backend, which is a traditional quant stack. So you're able to, run all of that in kind of an isolated environment, which you would if you were a programmer and you had built this infrastructure natively, and then it communicates back with the LLM to produce analytics based on the output. And so, with that in mind, you're not leaving the LLM to do any of the computation, and it essentially avoids a lot of the inherent biases that it carries.
Look, I had another session pretty recently with a quant researcher. He was mentioning the importance of not being blocked on where to position your machine learning model in your architecture. So if you have like a standard feature enrichment pipelines, and then you have a machine learning model stacked there, that not necessarily be the rightest place to stack it. It might become perfectly by the end of the architecture. It doesn't really, not necessarily mean that the architecture is supposed to be very, very generic. And that really resonates with everything that you're sharing here because you're saying with pure confidence, which is brilliant, that, hey, I am having, or I'm putting the LLM in my architecture as in a very, very neutral and in a very neutral place, and you can propose the position and like that's by the end of the day your decision. That's the ability of dynamic environment, which I really like, and I would like to think with you how would how would a particular use case will be like. So if you were a quant research, how would you leverage your system in order to accelerate your quant research prototypes?
Yeah. So I guess with the old adage of like P's and Q's quants, like we're much more set up on the kind of like strategy and kind of say alpha development rather than like market makers and a lot of the mass functionality. But to give like a few brief examples, so we have pretty wide data coverage across all asset classes, and then a variety of alternative data. And so naturally that data pipeline is growing, and that's a big part of the utility. But in terms of the underlying functionality, um, we support pretty much any query from as basic as, hey, what does the market typically do in the 5 minutes after non-farm payrolls? And it can then go and look back. It's very simple query, but it's something that, you might want to look into all the way up to, hey, I have this quantitative strategy with these, several parameters. This is the risk management I'd want. This is how I would like to simulate slippage and commission based on the markets that I'm trading. And then you get a full dashboard showing you all of your ratios, returns, drawdown periods, kind of anything a quant would want to look at. And um, kind of the next step
Do you think that there is a fluctuations in terms of in terms of market need? So I will explain what do I refer to when I say fluctuation. It's might be a big word, but now a quant or a particular type of the quant would like to have a set of parameters that he is actually looking for, and another type of of a quant would like to have a different set of parameters. So not necessarily they are they're interested in the same set. So can you enable them to decide what parameters they're actually looking for, or is it built-in features? And from your calls, what do you think about that necessity of having like multiple set of parameters that they can actually choose from?
Yeah. So in terms of parameters, it's pretty wide open. We've kind of done so intentionally. So we've built kind of internal functionality where the backend can support kind of any traditional quant strategy from pretty much your whole assortment of technical indicators to math, volatility, machine learning. So all of those kind of like base algorithms are built in our backend. And so then when you want to use one of those as part of a script or an idea, it's essentially calling from a pre-vetted library of transforms. And that's what another area in how we kind of are able to prove a lot more credible and you're essentially able to verify the scripts and strategies that are being run is because everything that you're sourcing is referenced in-house, right? We don't allow the LLM to go and like grab functions from the internet or information from the internet, which would again then kind of break that
Why?
barrier of
That's the like most promising capability of LLMs nowadays.
well, I think that there's in what we're trying to do, I would say no. So there's definitely like great promise for like specific agents to go off and do that, but when you kind of give your whole system the allowance to go like web scrape, a lot of what we found in the testing of this is as soon as the LLM gets to a point where it doesn't know and it has to think, its automatic response would be, let me go just web scrape or find something on the internet and pull it into that. And that's essentially the root of the hallucinations and all of the things that you wouldn't want in a pretty defined quantitative research process. And so with us,
So,
it's you have the cleaned market data, you have the back end and kind of system in place. And so you can add in elements as you'd like, but everything is intentionally quite structured to essentially protect against that.
and for you as a CEO of a startup company in the quantitative industry, I would like to ask you about the calls that you're making with your customers and with your relationships that you're developing with your customers. How do you extract the rightest information to understand their interaction with the market? And from their interaction in the market, how do you actually extract what do they actually need and what do they really want to consume?
hmm Yeah, it's a good question. I think when we started off, a
Thank you.
lot of it was, from my own experience working in that world, what do the workflows of a lot of these different traders look like? Because someone who's trading high yield is going to be looking at very different things throughout the day than someone who's trading, equity derivatives or something like that. And so wanting to have coverage on the data side is one element, but making sure that the workflow is aligned with that data to support each type of trader is naturally really important as well. And so we're certainly early and we're in that process, but it's definitely a deep focus of ours to speak with customers of what are your workflows, where do you see AI having the biggest value, and then we can kind of fill in the gaps of, well, here's how Epoch can already support, 75% of what you've described, and here's how we can add in, tailored agents or all sorts of different functionalities that would not only just serve as kind of a traditional co-pilot, but actually be able to complete full workflows for them. And, the eventual kind of next step for us is to essentially transform the platform into a, you know, junior quant that sits next to you. And so any trader or analyst on, across any asset class really has someone who's not only taking instructions, but also almost forward looking of going out and reading the news and scraping things and then using our infrastructure to test stuff and provide insights to the trader.
Great. Let's shift gears. Speaking about the infrastructure, you said that you have completely built an infrastructure for heavy tailed quantitative research pipelines. And I would like to ask you, how would you think of, because that's a major challenge to understand. Like, obviously, as you've mentioned, everyone or every firm has its own need, and you're creating an infrastructure that's supposed to serve the market entirely, like hypothetically, not hypothetically, but that's your envision, but hypothetically is supposed to serve the entire market. And I would like to ask you, how would you capture such a challenge? How would you break it? How would you understand each and every single component within your architecture? And would you think about it? Because you have mentioned a dynamic environment. You have mentioned so many different terms that I would like to tailor into the specific term by understanding how would you think of that challenge initially.
Yeah. So I think when you're a startup, thinking about, oh, we need to capture the whole market, which is naturally big. There's a lot of different players. They have a lot of different ways of participating in the market, from, sell side investment banks to asset managers to hedge funds doing, running all different types of strategies. Um, and so I think for us, it's start where you add value. And so for us, that's small and mid-sized hedge funds that are trading, strategies are focused on asset classes of data that we support. And so
Mhm.
starting small like that makes it a lot more manageable. It's let's go,
Obviously.
yeah, let's go
But,
talk.
but by the way, I do think that you cannot really capture everything. Like that
No,
would
but
be
I mean,
that would be like, a bit reckless if you no, but think about it. That might not be the rightest path to go with. So I do think that, minimizing the aspect of who or where you want to go might resonate more with understanding the market, the market demands to create a very robust research
yeah,
environment.
I mean, as part of, finding product market fit and really targeting a specific ICP as an early stage company is by all means
ICP,
important. Initial customer profile. So it's exactly pinpointing
got
who
it.
you want to go after to start.
Hmm.
Um, And so, we certainly, have that in mind. Obviously, um there is a big market or areas to expand into, and I think that, that's kind of the work of every successful company is starting small with, one type of persona that you can provide really, really strong value to, and then growing from there, expanding into other areas from there as you kind of scale, grow your team, grow your influence, all of those things. And so, you're very spot on that no, we can't just kind of go and say, hey, this is for everybody on Wall Street. That's not an effective kind of growth plan in a sense. But we definitely, are kind of seeing synergies in how both sell side traders and buy side traders, though they do very different things, there's a lot of overlap in the information that they want to cover, in the things that they want to understand. And naturally, there's a lot of information that's shared between the two of them. Um, and so I think that we're, looking deeply at those kind of synergies and seeing kind of what that expansion plan might look like as we grow.
Hmm. Well, okay. Let's dive deep into the architecture itself, if it would be possible, just to hear, like, on a high level, how would you think, or how would you architect everything? Um, how would you create a robust backtesting environment in C++ to assist research procedures?
Yeah. So I do have a co-founder. He was a software engineer at Microsoft before this and specializes in C++. So he's by all means our CTO and technical lead in terms of, doing a lot of the programming. Naturally, we work together deeply on kind of the UX of the product and how it, is experienced by the trader, as I can kind of give my 2 cents from my own experience. But I've certainly relied a lot on him, and he's, fantastic developer. So very lucky to be, build alongside him. And so he's been kind of the lead on a lot of our architecture and infrastructure decisions.
Mhm. Okay, that makes sense. But that's totally fine. But I would like to dive deep into the architecture, if possible,
Mhm.
itself, in order to understand how would you actually think of building such an engine?
Yeah. So I guess to start off, our kind of observation in the market was, you're seeing AI quickly become, I'd say, pretty good, if not, excellent in a variety of industries. They started with programming, you saw Cursor, and now Claude Code is definitely widely used.
What
I
about
think
codecs? I forgot
Codex too.
codecs.
There's a variety of
Please,
them.
don't be rude. Don't be rude.
I know. Can't exclude anybody. And then Harvey and Lagora, and there's many on the law side, and actually that's very text heavy, and so LLMs were kind of being able to be integrated pretty quickly. And so I think when we noticed the challenges with AI and trading, just because the level of correctness that people in finance demand is much higher, I would say the culture around it is a little different too. The kind of people naturally are skeptical of the answers and the outputs. Naturally, if you're putting money on the line, like, you really need to be able to trust the outputs of whatever you're working with. And so our kind of theory around that was, we really need to be an infrastructure first company, not really an AI or LLM first company. And the AI is really an accessibility element to the platform. And so at its core, our infrastructure, as you described, is we have a full kind of institutional grade backtesting engine in C++. Um, and the way that the AI is essentially layered on top is we've built, I would say, in largely an internal programming language that allows the LLM to communicate with our backend effectively to, describe what data they need to reference, what transforms need to be used to in order to run the script or whatever they've described. And on the AI side, essentially layered on top in order to do that, it's a multi-agent system. And so we have specific agents that are very good at doing specific tasks, and those layer and funnel into a broader agent, which is able to basically serve as the communication layer between the user and the system.
Very, very interesting. Would you count on an agentic system as it is right now to be a part or even an integral part of your product?
Um,
Because that might
say
be a
that
bit
one, say
tricky as
that one
well.
again.
Obviously,
Sorry.
you can see all the buzz with OpenClaw, and you can see that agentic systems are actually in a rise right now. And I am asking if you're actually counting on agentic systems that will be integrated within your product in production, that by the end of the day, that product will be marketed to a very conservative and very well kept industry like the quantitative industry.
Yeah. So I would say the high level answer is yes. I would say, with OpenClaw specifically, there's of course a lot of security and privacy concerns that kind of came along with that early system. I think that that's an architecture that will be worked out over time. Of course, it was kind of new. People were, using it, but it was doing some, nefarious things, deleting files and stuff internally. So I think the principle that it represented of agentic systems, where if there was a handful of agents that could go out and do specific research tasks, collect data on our platform, and then bring them in and be able to then use our computation engine to kind of be again the layer of truth and the actual computation of a lot of what these agents could analyze, read news, go out, they could really perform like a junior quant or an analyst as an employee, where they're actually doing functions and instructions that you give them without you having to kind of repeat that as like you might in just a individualized copilot. So
Mhm.
I think that there's a lot of opportunity to lean into that type of system, but naturally it has to kind of be constrained. And I would say, given our industry and in general most enterprises, data privacy and security are top of mind.
Mhm. I got it. So, um, that's really interesting because obviously we're talking about very conservative market, but I would like to know what do you think about not integrating agentic systems, but integrating much more conservative technology, but that technology won't really bring you the same scale because it's not the same technology. But by the end of the day, it would be much more capped. You will never experience as an entrepreneur and as a visionary. That's a question. That's a different type of the question. What do you think about having very much more well-capped technology, but that would be heavily served the same market, but without the same scale that you're actually able to reach with agentic systems. How would you treat such an occasion?
Yeah, I think for us, we definitely have an emphasis on the platform needs to just genuinely perform better than anything else. Like for demos can only take you so far, and I think that that's kind of what we've noticed in a lot of the trading world is, companies will put out a very, fruitful looking demo, but in the real world, there's just a level of complexity that's hard to simulate. And so when things get into those situations and into production, they don't perform in the way that you would have hoped. And I think that we have been overly conscious of wanting to get there where we feel if our system performs to the way that we expect it to and that we, are seeing that it can, product-led growth will do its kind of work for us in a sense. Where like if we really can perform to the level of real world complexity and it functions consistently in production, even if it's just the simple copilot, like that's step one. Agentic systems beyond that are, very much conditional on does the underlying infrastructure and framework work 100% of the time without question, producing accurate, deterministic, and verifiable results. Like that's kind of like our, you know, just simple goal to start. I think like a lot of these things are very exciting and forward looking. But to your point, it is a conservative industry. There are, um, there's a level of correctness that you need to meet in order to be trusted. And a lot of times, people need to see it, see it work many, many times over before they're going to trust it. So that's definitely goal number one. Adding in a lot of these other elements are exciting as, new technology comes out and no doubt, but we're definitely conscious of kind of not getting lost in that and that like, real world functionality is like the core to our success.
Mhm. Okay, let's speak about the ICP from the ideal customer profile, correct?
Yeah, yeah, ideal initial, well, all good, all works.
All works, the ideal initial, whatever, ironic
Yeah.
customer profile. That could lead to, many occasions. I would like to ask you, how would you treat different types of clients? Because you obviously have volatility traders, you have buy side, sell side traders, which is completely opposite. And you still need to serve each and every single one of them. So in terms of pitching your product, how do you pitch your product to different types of clients? What resonates with their need the most? How would you know how to and where to manage properly the thing that you're actually doing?
Yeah. So it definitely varies, I would say, certainly by, buy and sell side, but also very much by asset class. So someone who's doing long short equity is going to have a very different kind of scope than someone doing discretionary macro or kind of, quant anything. And so I'd say the way that we explain kind of the core value of it definitely varies to who we're talking to. I would say it's definitely a dynamic product insofar as for a quant, we're not necessarily looking to like replace whatever infrastructure they have in place for deployment and a lot of those things. Like those are frequently, entirely in-house built systems. Um, and so that's really not our vision. I think for us, it can be, we can allow a quant to iterate on ideas much quicker than them having to go and spin up a lot of the code and data pipelines and all the things that would come from building a strategy, tweaking parameters. They can do that a lot faster with us. Naturally for them, there are definitely other venues if they are, outright programmers and don't necessarily want to use the natural language side. But that's definitely where we're seeing early value on the quant side. For kind of everyone else, even if you are technical, I would say, Epoch is a lot like putting, a technical kind of quant toolkit in your pocket. I always like to make the joke, like the in the movie Big Short, he's pitching the idea and he goes, "That's my quant." And it's like, it's someone who's done the math and supportive of the trade idea. And more or less that's what we want to serve as everybody's, essentially quant, where they can go to, our platform and find, does the data support whatever idea or phenomenon I have? Can I vet that quickly? And so you essentially eliminate the need to see either, hey, here's my analyst. I need him to go off and like, write a Python script and run that analysis, or I need to stay late and do it. And even if, both of those things happen, I'm not going to have the information like right now in order to make whatever, decision I would like to. And so it's definitely speed to decision, which is a big one, which is you no longer have to wait in order to get these level of results where, it's
Mhm.
on quality data, it's verifiable, so you can actually see what, script was written and run in order to produce the results that it did. And so with all of those things, it's you're giving a toolkit to people who either had no access to these types of insights before because they just were non-technical, or even if they were, it's still just much faster to get to them. They can make decisions on the fly. And so essentially the variety of data we have really is able to make it helpful to all sorts of different people just based on what they're trading.
Mhm. And okay, that makes me curious. If okay, hypothetically, we're in the financial markets. Your entry thesis got completely changed. How would you assess them if the thesis itself is completely broken or it's completely misleading? The current market regime.
Sorry, repeat that question again.
So I'm asking because we're in a very very high speed market and everything is changing very very rapidly.
Mm.
I'm asking if the change of different market regimes uh, impact their entry thesis. Does your product enables them to analyze the current regime, understand what actually impacting their positions, and telling them how to they or how do they need to deviate from their entry thesis and to give more adaptive very, very rapidly.
Yeah, so there's a few kind of questions built in there. So
Yeah,
I'll start
sorry.
with one of the
I told
yeah.
you. I told you before that I'm going to bring you a stack of questions, and you'll
I'll
you'll have to answer all of them. I'm going to force you to do that, but that's
I'll
okay. I told you that's my job. That's why I'm not getting paid for.
I'll start with the regimen. So there's certainly like a variety of ways to kind of classify that, and our system is by all means capable of kind of a lot of different ways that you'd want to kind of look at that, and obviously that varies across markets and geopolitical things. We do have news feeds and stuff like that, and so uh, referencing those things, all of that can be embedded in your prompts and the answers. So I guess to that point, yes. Um, and to the extent that so I'll say integrating kind of live customer portfolios and some of their internal docs is another one of those areas where we think that the kind of agentic system built into our platform can be a lot of help. It's not only can it look at external data, but it can look at, hey, who did we trade with this week? What did we trade? Sourcing ideas. And so that's one of those, yes, but it's in the future in an extent. So I think that there's a lot of really interesting opportunities around that, and it's most definitely from what we've heard core to the workflow is you need to kind of be ingrained with the internal data, and I think that there's a lot of really interesting areas to build around in that sense. But that's definitely an area that we're working to at the moment, but we see a lot of potential in.
Mhm. Interesting. Interesting. Okay, so hypothetically, if assessments have been changed, you know how to assess them, and they have already have the data in order to plug into your product to derive much more concrete and
Well, also
coherent.
like it will be a part of whatever they run. So if you're, tracking oil prices right now, right? Like those updated price data is going to be in, right? Like our data sets are always being updated. And so when you come in, each day, like it's going to be updated to whatever's happened. And so to the extent that like you, I guess, would see a regimen change, like it would also just be embedded in the data that's being queried or worked with.
Hmm. Okay, totally understandable. Um, Look, we speak about quantitative aspects of the game, and we are constantly speaking about orthogonal features. And I would like to ask you about how you are able to map or enable quants to map that the orthogonal characteristic between the features in order to understand, okay, I already know what type of features I need to plug in. I know what type of understanding I need in order to, sustain that model. And that's how I'm going to build my entry thesis plot. I would like to understand from you or from your perspective how you're actually assessing them and understanding of what do they actually need to do in terms of, selecting the right features to build the right strategy.
Yeah, I mean, so when someone gets a login to the platform, they get essentially a product guide that outlines all of the data that they have access to, all of the essentially functionality of the platform in terms of the different areas of analysis and features that they might want to work with. And so they essentially kind of can get a sense of this is the universe that I'm working within. And then from there, they kind of have the freedom to explain whatever that they would like. And it's able to parse that and put it together. And so, from the standpoint of us kind of telling them like what features to add or anything like that, we definitely stay on the side of we're a toolkit to be kind of maximized by the user, not so much, hey, we're gonna like give you strategies. And so with that
Oh,
in
that's
mind,
that's complete. That's a complete researching product.
um, yeah, so I that's a little bit of, that definitely ties into kind of the agentic framework that we want to layer on top. But yeah, we definitely see ourselves as a research assistant, co-pilot, and eventually I think like a coworker, in the sense that we're not so much producing strategies, but that we're giving them every tool that they would want that can help them go and find it from their own ideas or from the ideas of the agents that they deploy and create within the system. And so that's why we see a lot of opportunity there is, if you were to go tell your, analyst to go like research some area and come back with some data that you can come look, you can look at and then maybe integrate into a strategy or whatever it might be. um, that's a lot of what could be all kind of encompassed on the platform.
Mhm. Very okay. Very interesting. I would like to stop talking about Epoch for a moment. I would like to speak about your professional background before starting Epoch. I would love if you can share with us more about it, about like, being a trader at a Canadian firm, if I remember correctly. So
Mhm.
yeah, please.
Yeah, so I joined Bank of Montreal out of college. So a lot of the
What college did you went to?
I went to Rochester Institute of Technology,
Hmm.
um, and joined out of college. A lot of the banks in New York, and I'd say this exists in London and a lot of other banking cities have like analyst classes where they hire, a batch of kids each year out of colleges that come in and get placed onto different desks. They have this most definitely on the investment banking side and some other areas as well. So I was in the sales and trading group. It started off as a rotational program, so I spent time in U.S. interest rate research and Delta One trading, and then ended up full time in high yield fixed income.
Hmm. Okay, and how was like interacting with customers because you were also in the sell side? How was
Mhm.
like interacting with the customer? And by the way, you do have a technological background, so why, initially you thought about that position or that pivot from technological advantage to a very, very non-technological position.
Yeah. I mean, so, interacting with clients is obviously a big part of the job when you sit, as kind of a market maker or a flow trader where, your job is to essentially, drive volume for the desk. That's how a lot of, bank desks are making money. And of course, there's a portion of it that they're taking directional bets, but a lot of it is flow. So that was very, kind of common routine, very, very frequently people on your desk, salespeople, traders are going out with clients. Definitely you get kind of eased into that as a junior person where you start to get to come along to, events and dinners and participate in that process. It was
Very, very
definitely great.
important.
It was
That's how
definitely
you're
a
creating
great
that
experience.
network.
I would say a lot of the experiences I had, kind of both working and on the client side, I think are just things that are it's hard to kind of get a feel for them unless you've kind of sat in that seat or been able to work in that environment. In terms of just like now building the product I am, I think it's been tremendously helpful in kind of having kind of like lived the experience of who we're looking to sell to. And through that, you kind of just have a more detailed sense of, what are the workflows of these people, what is valuable to them, what does, all of those things look like. And so from that angle, it was definitely a great experience to have.
I got it. Okay, let's dive deep into the last topic of today's session. I would like to speak about your entrepreneurial journey, which is very, very fascinating to me. I would like to hear from you how it's like to be a CEO of a very, very young startup. What are the difficulties that you're actually experiencing? Because we're in a very, very complicated market with complicated people and complicated individuals. So, what are the main difficulties that you're actually experiencing that that are completely that define exactly the roller coaster that you're actually going through as a CEO?
Yeah. This is a commonly discussed topic online. Um, you know, Naturally, I think you really have to be to some level obsessed with what you're working on to, one, like take the leap of being a founder, um, or, even joining an early stage startup. I think, there's a lot of kind of similarities there. But there's a lot of challenges. There's a lot of kind of jumping into the deep end and not really knowing what you're doing, but just having to like figure it out on the fly. And I think that, you know, you have to learn things once and then you know how to do them. And so there's a lot of things that you have to do for the first time. And, those can be, writing, sales documentation and pitches to very simple things of just, taxes and setting up all of those things. So there's kind of a full spectrum of things that you're responsible for covering and driving the vision of, what you're doing. And, there's certainly like, you know, easy days and hard days, I'd say. But there's a ton of
Like
really high
like
quality
everything.
resources online for startup founders that give you some direction on like, hey, here's probably the things you should be doing to be highly effective. And so with those, and also just kind of having a genuine love for what we're doing and what we're building, um, I feel like in the grand scheme of things, it's not too challenging to like want to wake up every day and do it. Despite some of the kind of, I'd say, short term or, on a microcosm level, ups and downs.
Mhm. I got it. So, first of all, Garrett, I would love to say that I had, really, really enjoyable conversation. That definitely really deviates a bit from what we're speaking about here in the blockchain quants. But I think it's very, very necessary to have those types of conversations to understand exactly what actually happens in the market, not the financial one, but the market behind the financial market. What do they consume? What do they sell? I think that's the best and the most accurate data point that you can actually gather in order to understand how the market is actually evolving to. And I would love to thank you for your participation and for your insights. I think they were pretty concise, pretty strong, pretty understandable. And I would like to wish you best of luck and success with Epoch and everything that you're doing. You're a very talented individual, and thank you for coming.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
Cheers.
And cheers, cheers, and everybody that was listening. I would love to thank you also for listening to our great conversation with Garrett. And until next time, bye bye.